Your soulmate is always grinning. You might be surprised at the reason. Before they could conceal it, something nearly revealed them. When someone mentions you in passing during a routine chat, your soulmate's whole demeanor abruptly changes. Their shoulders loosened, their eyes brightened, and then that smile appeared. Not the courteous grin that people employ to try to be amiable. Not the fleeting smile that vanishes in an instant. This one remained. They attempted to gaze down. As if keeping their hands occupied might mask what was going on, they reached for anything nearby. Your soulmate briefly responded, "Nothing," when someone across the room asked, "Why are you smiling like that?" They simply shrugged their heads and muttered, "It's nothing," but it wasn't. The intriguing part of this story is precisely the element they declined to elaborate on. Because anything related to you had reached them at the perfect time earlier that day. It wasn't overly dramatic. Crowds, a big announcement, and a well-planned love scenario were all absent. Somehow, the fact that it was smaller gave it greater force. A recollection came to mind. You once said something that came back to them. Perhaps it was the way you gave them support when they were self-conscious, or the way you made a seemingly everyday situation seem oddly memorable. Whatever set it off, they became aware that they could recall minute information about you that they had assumed they had forgotten. The way you made them feel understood without asking for an explanation, the way you laughed, and your attitude during a particular chat. The smile wasn't really about remembering the past, so stay in the present. It originated with what they began to envision next. They imagined seeing you once more. And rather than practicing a flawless speech, their thoughts strayed to unexpectedly straightforward topics, resulting in a lengthier than anticipated chat. Walking somewhere without rushing, hearing you laugh at something foolish, finally expressing the words they've edited 100 times within their brain. That's when someone else saw the smile coming back. "There it is again," they jokingly said. This time, your partner was unable to ignore it despite their best efforts. What their words were still shielding was visible on their face. Then they were asked a question for which they were unprepared. "Is that individual the subject of this?" There was silence, a look out the window, another grin, and then the most subdued response. "Perhaps. You haven't yet seen one detail, though." The questioner already knew exactly who they were referring to. And the reason your sweetheart has been wearing that smile is because of what transpired later. Teasing gave way to a surprisingly genuine exchange of words. Your partner acknowledged that thinking about you is no longer like reliving an incomplete experience. It's like gazing at something that might be. That distinction is important. They aren't grinning because everything has miraculously improved. Something inside them has grown more apparent, which is why they are grinning. Instead of concentrating solely on what might go wrong, they are now considering what might ultimately go well. They then took up their phones. There was your name. For a few seconds, their thumb lingered over the screen. They were about to type something when they paused, grinned once more, and locked the phone. It's not because they've changed their minds, but rather because what they want to express merits more than a hasty message. And that smile will make far more sense when you find out what they're thinking about saying instead. When no one was even discussing you, the next smile emerged. Your partner was sitting calmly with their phone resting close by when a thought came to them so clearly that they were unable to control the change in their countenance. They had been picturing the time when they would finally talk to you without using cautious language. No ambiguous clues, no acting as though they are unaffected by your presence. They imagined staring at you and acknowledging that, at some point, you became the person they instinctively wanted to confide in. The positive news, the absurd little tales, the times that didn't seem important until they thought about telling you about them. But hold on, for that smile concealed another insight. They had more on their minds than just what they intended to tell you. They wanted to know what you may respond. There was a tense little silence after that inquiry, and then there was another distinct smile. They didn't feel like they had to run away from uncertainty for the first time. It was thrilling. Then a remarkably straightforward question was posed by someone close to them. What genuinely appeals to you about this individual? Your beauty, personality, and energy could have provided an easy response to your soulmate. Rather, they became silent. Their gaze shifted to the ground as if they were trying to select one memory from among dozens. The room fell silent when they finally said, "It's how I feel when I'm around them." They explained that with you, they don't feel the same pressure to perform, impress, or have every answer ready. They recalled times when you probably didn't realize you were doing anything special, listening intently, remembering a tiny detail, responding with kindness when they expected indifference. If this story reminds you of someone special, feel free to share it, leave a comment, subscribe, and stay tuned to see what happens next. Here's the surprising part: the smile you keep making comes from dozens of everyday moments that subtly became meaningful, not from one dramatic memory. However, their friend continued the conversation by leaning over and asking, "So why haven't you told them?" The perfect day, the perfect conversation, the perfect sentence, your sweetheart said, laughing lightly, but the question struck a deeper chord than anticipated. However, they've recently come to realize that genuine connections don't always happen at the ideal moment. Sometimes someone just needs to have the courage to be authentic. That thought followed them throughout the day, and they found themselves picturing you sitting across from them at a coffee shop. They found themselves thinking, "I wish I could tell them about this," while driving to a familiar location, wondering if you would also appreciate being there. See what's going on here? Their minds are starting to make room for you in situations that haven't yet occurred, rather than revolving around a single recollection. Later that night, something finally changed. Your soulmate opened their phone once more, saw your name, and instead of shutting down the screen right away, they started typing. One sentence appeared, then another, erased both, started again, stopped, and grinned. Rather than becoming irritated, they realized why every version sounded incorrect. They chose a different course of action, saving nothing and sending nothing, just putting the phone down and whispering something that would have shocked everyone who had seen them hesitate earlier. I want to say it properly. This is the real reason their smile has become so hard to hide. They are no longer merely remembering you. Instead, they are getting ready to have a sincere conversation with you. When that time comes, they want you to know something that they haven't yet disclosed to anyone, and it's surprisingly straightforward, which is precisely why it matters so much. Your soulmate doesn't want the conversation to start with some grandiose proclamation. Instead, they want to share with you the moment they realized your name had become associated with happiness in their minds. It happened almost without warning, without permission, and without planning. Someone would mention a place you both knew, and they would smile. Even when they tried focusing on entirely unrelated things, a small memory of you could suddenly appear and soften their expression. At first, they dismissed it as nostalgia, but eventually they noticed something nostalgia couldn't explain. A familiar phrase would remind them of something you once said, and there it was again. One afternoon, your soulmate found themselves imagining a perfectly normal day with you, nothing cinematic, no elaborate setting, no carefully planned surprise, just two people sitting somewhere comfortable, talking until neither realized how much time had passed. This is a distinction you shouldn't miss because it changes the meaning of everything they've been feeling. Instead of pulling them backward, these thoughts were making them curious about the future. They pictured asking questions they had always been too afraid to ask, telling you something embarrassing and hearing you laugh, and, above all, listening to your responses without hurrying to the next moment. That scene stuck with them because it made clear what they truly wanted. The realization that they weren't pursuing excitement for its own sake, but rather a connection that felt natural, where silence didn't have to be filled and every conversation didn't have to be flawless, made them smile again. However, this time, it was accompanied by something else: determination. They started to question whether waiting indefinitely was safeguarding something priceless or just denying something significant a chance. When someone who knows your soulmate well noticed that they were unusually cheerful, they casually said, "You seem different lately." Your soulmate laughed and tried to change the topic, but it didn't work. "No, seriously," the person continued. "You seem lighter." Your soulmate became quiet. This was the moment that pushed that question even further. Your soulmate looked down at their hands and acknowledged that they had spent too much time trying to predict every possible outcome with you. Would you understand? Would the timing feel right? Would saying too much change things? But somewhere in between all those questions, they had missed the most crucial one. They thought about giving another harmless response for a few seconds before finally saying, "I think I figured something out." What if you had been wondering about them too? Remember that question because it turned out to be the pivotal moment. All of a sudden, the prospect of being understood felt more powerful than the fear of saying the wrong thing. Later, when you were by yourself once more, they came back to your name on their phone, but this time, there was no desperate typing and deleting, no attempt to create the ideal opening. They just stared at the screen and grinned with the composed expression of someone who had finally come to terms with a choice. They realized that the conversation doesn't have to sound staged, it just needs to be genuine. Perhaps they'll start off with something routine, like "How you've been," and let the moment unfold organically. But eventually, if the conversation feels right, they want to tell you the truth. Your soulmate has recently started doing one small thing differently because of you. Thinking about you has been making ordinary days feel unexpectedly brighter, and before you assume that's the biggest revelation, there's more. The smallest change turned out to reveal the biggest truth. Your soulmate has started saving moments for you, not objects, not dramatic surprises, but moments. When something funny happens, they remember it because they want to tell you later. No one around them knows why yet, but once you figure it out, you'll understand why this has progressed far beyond a fleeting smile. They almost automatically think, "You would probably like this," when they find a peaceful cafe, hear an intriguing story, or come across a location that makes them pause for a moment. They've even noticed that they are paying more attention to details they would have previously overlooked because they can picture your response, which makes those details seem important to remember. And that's what shocked them the most. You aren't taking up all of their thoughts. Something far more significant is taking place. Their life is going on as usual, but some moments now seem unfinished until they imagine sharing them with you. Hold on to this realization because one specific moment ultimately persuaded them that their smile wasn't fleeting. It happened close to the end of an otherwise ordinary day. People were going about their daily lives, the light outside was fading, and your soulmate had finally found a few quiet minutes by themselves. Suddenly, they remembered something funny from earlier, and their first reaction was to grab the phone and tell you. They stopped in the middle, and instead of being disappointed, they grinned because they suddenly realized what had been happening inside of them. You had become someone they naturally wanted to be a part of their happiness, not because they needed you to make it happen, but because it seemed like sharing it with you could make a good moment even better. They gained clarity from that distinction. They don't want to come into your life with unrealistic expectations. Instead, they want to come with curiosity, honesty, and enough bravery to see what the connection could become. If this unfolding story has brought to mind someone in your own life, feel free to share it with them. Then your soulmate did something they had never done before. Instead of just thinking about what they would say, they started thinking about what they wanted to ask you. What has been making you happy lately? What are you looking forward to? What dream have you been secretly working toward? What makes you laugh when no one else is around? Those questions completely changed the picture. Leave your thoughts in the comments or subscribe to stay connected for more stories like this. They came to the realization that a meaningful conversation couldn't just be them confessing to you while you stood there listening. They wanted to know who you are now, not just the version they remembered. This realization made them smile in a completely different way, one that was softer, more assured, and calmer. Because affection had started to blossom into sincere curiosity about your world. The next detail matters. They even practice preventing themselves from anticipating your responses. Whatever you tell them, they want to hear it straight from you. No presumptions, no imagined version of the conversation, just two people discovering what is truly there. Your soulmate looked at your name again, but there was no frantic hesitation this time. They realized they didn't need a compelling reason to reach out. A simple sincere beginning could be sufficient. Their smile returned as they imagined your name appearing in an active conversation rather than remaining silent on a screen. Now, the moment they kept putting it off doesn't seem so intimidating. Their fingers moved toward the screen, and for the first time, they weren't looking for an excuse to wait because they had finally decided what mattered more than perfect timing, and what they chose to do next may explain every smile that came before it. After spending so much time trying to find the perfect words, the sentence that finally felt right was almost ridiculously ordinary, nothing theatrical, nothing designed to impress you, just an opening that could lead somewhere real. When your soulmate looked at the screen, read the simple sentence they had written, and realized something had changed inside of them, they were no longer trying to guess your response or creating 10 hypothetical conversations around a single message. Instead, they were just prepared to be authentic. At that point, the waiting finally lost its power. For a brief moment, their finger hovered, and that familiar smile reappeared, not because they knew exactly what was going to happen, but rather because they had finally stopped viewing uncertainty as an enemy. The message wasn't a big announcement or a confession, rather, it was warmer and more organic. The kind of opening that allows two people to find out where the conversation wants to go, and right before they made a decision, they recalled something you had done that had seemed unimportant at the time. You made them feel heard, and that memory addressed the question they had been carrying for days. Why does thinking about you make them smile so easily? Because beneath every memory, every imagined conversation, and every moment they wanted to save for you, there was one feeling they had found difficult to identify. Ease. Your soulmate came to the realization that some of their favorite memories of you weren't particularly noteworthy from the outside. They were everyday exchanges in which neither of you had to impress anyone, a glance that conveyed more than a convoluted explanation, a moment when you recalled something they had mentioned in passing, or an unexpected laugh that altered the atmosphere between you both. The next thing they decided was not to make you believe anything because those details had survived, because they represented something uncommon to them, the possibility of being completely present with another person. Now, they wanted to know if that feeling still existed between you, not in their imagination or in an old memory. It was about giving you both a chance to find out. Instead of imagining the ideal answer from you, they started to imagine different scenarios. Perhaps you would respond right away, perhaps you would need some time, perhaps the first few sentences would be a little awkward before you both relaxed and began laughing. Strangely, each version made them smile because authenticity was now the goal instead of perfection. They wanted to hear about your day before delving deeper. They wanted to find out what had changed in your world, and if the opportunity finally presented itself, they wanted to tell you one thing that they had never been able to express clearly before: you've crossed my mind more often than you probably realize. They looked away from the screen with that same unmistakable expression even when they imagined those words, but before they could proceed, they had to find out for themselves whether they were grinning because they missed an old connection or because they truly wanted to create a new one with you. The answer came more quickly than they had anticipated. They deliberately stopped thinking about who you used to be because they didn't want yesterday's version of you. Instead, they wanted to learn about your new ideas, your priorities, and the things you care about now that they might not be aware of. Suddenly, the reason behind all those smiles became exquisitely evident. Your soulmate looked at the message one last time, grinning at how easy everything suddenly seemed. They weren't dreaming of going back to an old chapter exactly as it was. Instead, they were thrilled about the prospect of starting from where you both stand today. There was no predetermined outcome, no demand that the future resemble the past, just a genuine opportunity to reconnect and see what happens.